People like change, but more than anything else, people hate loss. I can see that there ends up being resistance, that there's resistance actually going on internally. You got to learn how to be present, because that's all that you have. You can't lead anything you're afraid to lose.
Well, welcome back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast. It's your girl, Breezy, and I'm here with Mr. Right New Rules himself, Adrian Crawford. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. We're doing big things.
We are doing big things, and I was spending about an hour today from a good friend of mine. Shout out to my man Vince Hunt, learning all the ins and outs of Chat GPT. I felt like, man, I just thought, well, my man taught me some sorcery or something. Then I went to go see Dumbledore, and now I got the Harry Potter, got some Harry Potter bags now with the stuff. Man, it's amazing where AI is going and just the stuff you can do. And again, Vince is one of the most creative guys I know, and just actually working through it and just showing how, just the efficiency, I think things that normally would take you 2 or 3 days, you can get it done in seconds. So it was really cool.
Mm-hmm. Vince is magical.
Super dope.
Super dope.
Super dope.
That's funny. I feel like, I'll just say all the things we're doing. We're looking for a new building.
Yes, we are.
That's a big project.
It is.
We're basically turning our main product into a business.
Yes, we are.
And we have a little conference coming up next week that we're hosting.
We are hosting Black Leadership Summit. Super excited about that. Partnership with my man, Chris Johnson. And really this idea of, really the thing is really to equip, to equip and empower Black leaders who are leading in diverse spaces, whether that's in a church space or non-church space. There's not a lot of places for Black leaders to be able, who are really committed to building multi-ethnic businesses or nonprofit spaces, whatever, actually gather somewhere. And so again, it gives them a chance, because when you're building in a multi-ethnic context, a lot of times you don't have a place to really, it's different, but you don't have a place to really be you. And what we try to do is create an environment to where people can actually, we always like to say it, that nothing needs to really be explained. And so we did our first one last year, and it was just an amazing time. And so we're pulling off again this year. The theme, numbers don't lie. Check the scoreboard. Shout out to my man Hove. And so, yeah, we're going to do that, man. It's been great. The teams have been doing an incredible job getting it ready. We're going to be dropping for all those merch stuff. Going to be coming. I'll actually be able for other people, for you guys to get some. So, again, you guys killed it with that. So, yeah, I'm really excited for next week.
So, question.
What up?
You talk a lot about how in your lifetime you have a goal to launch 1 million authentic leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And today I was thinking about how that's a goal.
Yep.
What is your vision for what will happen because of that goal? So if 1 million authentic leaders are launched in your lifetime, what do you think is going to be different in the world?
I think that there'll be more human flourishing. I believe authenticity unlocks human flourishing. And I believe that that spaces and places will take a step forward, that there'll be better flourishing. And what I mean by flourishing is that people having an opportunity, whether if that is to take a step up, So if that is bettering a community financially, if that's bettering a community when it comes to health, if that's bettering a community when it comes to emotional, like relationships, intelligence, and family. Again, I think if it's helping with technology, whatever, I think it's actually helping human flourishing. I believe human beings, when they live out of an authentic place, they actually bring real value to see other human beings flourish in life. And so I think that's what's going to happen. I think, everyone always talks about, hey, I want to leave the world a better place than when I came. I think if we can do that, of 1 million authentic leaders, I think we will leave the world a better place than when we found it.
That's interesting. I think we talk a lot, and this is just kind of random thoughts that I was having today. I think we talk a lot about authentic leaders.
Yep.
I think it would be, because we always have this debate on whether we frame it as authentic leaders or an idea of human purpose development or the idea of human flourishing.
Yep. And
today I was leaning towards human flourishing.
Yeah, I like the idea of human flourishing, but it's also like, it's that dynamic of what do people understand? You say human flourishing, okay, I think people can understand a little bit. But I think in today's world, you start thinking about in a corporate space or, any type of organization, the idea of leadership development, authentic leadership development. I think that's so it's one of those things where you're trying to figure out what do you want to communicate that best people can actually understand. You know what I mean? Like, because I think sometimes for me, I love the creative stuff, right? So go with the most abstract name ever and let me explain it to you. But sometimes that's not the most best, like, mass market appeal. You want to try to make it as simple as possible. And even doing authentic leadership development is a stretch a little bit because people are authentic leadership development. What is that? And so we have to explain that. And you go to human flourishing. I like it. I like us producing that, but then you're like, what does human flourishing mean? You know what I mean? And sometimes what you don't want to do, because, we live in a world, I think, where people are still who are leading don't think in this type of way. And so a lot of times when you start talking about human flourishing, like, people in corporate space don't really get that. I mean, they'll get it somewhat conceptually, but well, what does it help us with our business? How does it help our bottom line? How does it help shareholders? And so I think those are just kind of some of the ways where I'm, like, always constantly wrestling with, like, but yeah, if it was my perfect world, it probably would be human purpose development, human flourishing, something like that.
Yeah. I was thinking internally, though, even. Because if you were to tell me, like, in terms of vision and, like, buying into a vision, if you were to say, which everyone has a different capacity for, like, the highest level of vision that they want to hear about. If you were to say, I have a vision in my life to develop authentic leaders, I'm like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
But if you were to tell me I have a vision in my life to something, human flourishing, I'd be like, what? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I think that's the Gen Z in you, though.
Yeah, because I understand what you mean by authentic leader, or I have a
Yeah, I think
idea.
you've been around authentic leader, and I think, I think that's been, I think it's great, but we know that, man, the human flourishing part is what we're trying to get to. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, how, like what you're saying is that you can cast a vision for something broader, man. We want to see human flourishing. We want to see people just be better. We want to see people being able to walk in the, as best they can, the fullness of what's been there for them and making their lives better. You think about, with us launching the academy, we're doing an after-school academy in a very under-resourced community. Well, what are we trying to do? We're trying to develop authentic leaders so that some of those kids, all these kids in this school system have to go through our program. Man, we want to develop these authentic leaders because we believe it's going to lead to their flourishing, which in turn will lead to their family flourishing, other parts of their community flourishing. So, I mean, I think, but I do like that thought.
And maybe that's more of the vision for the collective.
Yeah,
New Rules, where everything is included.
It's human flourishing, yeah. Could be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Just talking through things. So we've been doing something in Culture Creators with our team, where we've been focusing on how to have transformational teams.
Yep.
And this week, we did something called The Real Cost.
Yep.
So we're going to talk about that on the podcast today. Can you share a little bit about why you think that's important?
Yeah, it kind of started from this quote. I'm going to read it and pull it up. And it's from Max Dupree, where he says, leadership is disappointing people at the pace they can stand. Leadership is disappointing people at the pace they can stand. I read that quote a few weeks back, and it really stopped me in my tracks. Because the truth is that is what leadership really is. Leadership is a constant place of disappointing people and at a pace they can stand. And it's very profound, because I think that what we don't talk about, and we do talk about it here, is the actual real cost of what leadership means. We talked a little bit on our last pod, but there's a lot more difficult things when it comes to leadership. And so I think that is one of the things I've been thinking a lot about over 20 plus years of leading. Like I mentioned, I think last time, I've been thinking a lot more about that. Like, I've been leading now for 20 years. It doesn't feel that way, or a little bit over that. And now just thinking about, man, I wish, I would have known the cost of it. Not that I wouldn't have done it, but man, it would have helped me, because a lot of times what you go through in leadership, it's going to be difficult. You hear stuff like leadership is lonely, but what you don't hear about, man, the friendships, the things that can impact, and what it actually will cost you, and the fact that you're spending a lot of time disappointing people because you're trying to see them, leaders are trying to change things. And a lot of people, as we mentioned last time, they're not afraid of, I think people like change, but more than anything else, people hate loss. And so a lot of times you're asking people to change, you're asking them to lose something. And so I think that's kind of where it's at. And I think for where we're at as a team, and I also think in society today, the world's in desperate need of leaders. You know what I mean? I think I was reading something the other day, and some of the research we've been doing on this product is like 65% or something, like 65-7% of executive C-suite executives don't feel that they actually have high capacity leaders within their organization.
Yeah, and 55% of CEOs believe that their greatest problem in the future is going to be developing leaders.
Yeah. And so I think it's a real thing. And I think it's a real issue that's ahead. And I think if we can actually just be a voice that's in that, and today to help somebody maybe take a step and actually trying to understand and really count the cost of leadership.
So with it, leadership is disappointing people at the pace they can stand. I read that and I'm like, yeah, I'm not a very good leader. Can you share a little bit more about what that's looked like for you?
Yeah, I think that, I love change. I'm willing to change really quick in certain areas, and be clear. Certain areas I'm not. But what I've come to realize is that a lot of times we want people to change. Like, we see it. Like, for example, as a leader, you see where you want to go. You see the vision. You see what it's going to take for the business to scale from one to the next. You see what it's going to take that person who is maybe your direct report, and they're trying to advance. They're trying to get a promotion or whatever. And you see what it's going to take for them to get there. But a lot of times they don't see it. And I think what you end up having to do is a lot of times you're like, man, a lot of times people just want to go and say, man, we're about to do this, 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 and this. And when you do that, those end up being big jumps, because they end up being big losses for people. That all of a sudden people have to change things internally. They have to let some things go that a lot of times people don't want that right away. You know what I mean? And so sometimes you can't lead people somewhere so fast. You have to lead them at a certain pace that they can stand, because if you lead them way too fast, they're going to walk away. They're going to get angry. They're going to get bitter. They're going to move in a different direction. And so that's the kind of the magic, and that's kind of the dance of leadership. It's trying to be able to disappoint people. And it's just so profound, because no one ever says that leadership is disappointing people. Leadership seems to be, we're leading people, we're pointing a new direction, you're lifting people up, you're, whatever. But it really is disappointing, because I think people, because if they could get there, they would already have done that. And so they need people actually to help them do that. And a lot of times they don't understand what they're going to have to leave.
What does disappointing people and a pace they can stand create within an organization?
I think what it creates in an organization is, one, I think it shows like care, that you're actually not trying, you're thinking about the people, because what you want to do when you talk about disappointing them at the pace they can stand is that you're not just like saying, you're not a leader saying, you know what, I don't care how you feel. I don't care what's going on. We're doing this. And you just need to get along for the ride. And if you can't deal with it, fine, we'll just run over you, right? I think actually the whole point of leadership is you want as many people to come with you. And I think sometimes leaders forget that. The point of the journey is you want people to come with you. And sometimes people have that mentality where they'll be like, well, they just couldn't hack it. So, they had to get off the bus. Well, no, maybe for them, they don't move as fast as you do. So I think that what it does, it shows empathy, shows care. And I think when people get there, they actually are really committed with you too. So I think it builds empathy in the organization, and I also think it builds like commitment and trust within it as well.
Basically what you're saying is it ties to forms of development and empowerment. It's because you're calling them up to who you believe that they should be, who you believe that they can be, based off what they say is important to them, based off what they say they want to commit to.
Yeah, it is. It's that when they say they're committed to something, now you're saying, okay, here's going to be the process to get there. And you just have to find that tension and balance of how fast you push somebody, how slow you go, because a lot of times people really need, it's kind of like working out. You know how it is. It's like when you work out and you're, say you're training somebody and they're trying to get back in shape. And, the worst thing you can do as a trainer is like somebody trying to get back in shape. You're like, all right, hey, dude hadn't worked out in like 4 years. You're like, hey, we're about to put you, like on, like in CrossFit doing the Murph. You know what I'm saying? You're like, all right, well, that brother is never showing up again. You know what I'm saying? You have to build them into it. And I think that's the idea of really good leaders. They see the potential, but then they have a plan, and that's one of the things that's not really there a lot. I think that I find hard is a lot of times there's not a lot of succession planning that goes on to actually lay out for people. Here's the process and plan I see for your development and your growth. And I think that that's where, those are great moments as well, where you actually can help people understand the level of what they're going to have to do. But the other thing I think most leaders, many times, don't realize that they're asking people to lose. I think they're just like, man, this is what you want to gain. But I think we have to be better at talking about what they're going to lose, because I think that's what gets people tripped up from not moving forward. I don't think they actually think about what they're going to have to give up in order to do that.
And it also seems like this is where leaders can typically bring in the idea of positional power in a form of compliance. So if you're not counting the cost, or if you're not counting the cost, it's because you're not being like compliant to the role that you're supposed to fulfill, or what I expect you to fulfill. So that's where the power play seems to come up a little bit. Yeah,
I think so, for sure.
Whenever you are disappointing the people that you lead, that's challenging and that's painful. So how do you navigate when somebody responds with greater levels of criticism, or they're upset, obviously they're disappointed? How do you internally navigate that response?
I think I have to try to look at, one, when they're saying it, why is it making me feel the way that I'm feeling? You know what I mean? Do I feel attacked? Do I feel insecure? That's really important. Like, that's a really important thing, I think, first and foremost. I think once you do it, then you try to look at, man, like, where's it coming from? You know, some people, they're coming from a place to where, again, if you do it long enough, you can start to see, like, okay, this person's not going to be able to go with you. Because now maybe it's turned from like, hey, they're frustrated that they're losing something, to like, it's gone from frustration to like real anger towards you. You know, now it becomes unhealthy. And so what I think you try to do, and what I try to do in those moments, is try to see where that person's at, try to see what's going on, see where I can have empathy for them, but also not relent either on what I think is best for them. That's the hardest thing. And I've said it before. You can't lead anything you're afraid to lose. The one thing I have to make sure happens, I think every leader, if you're helping lead people through change, you have to be okay with you may lose them. And I think most leaders are not. And I think that's when they begin to like compromise or go back on certain things. And in the end, it's because of how it's making them feel. They don't like how it makes them feel. They don't like how they're being viewed. And so since they don't like how they're being viewed, they want to kind of tweak it. Or they're worried about, here's the other thing, when a leader's trying to call someone up and that person may want to, you know, they don't like it, they may want to leave. And now here's what's happened with that leader. That leader's starting to realize, oh, my life's going to be a little bit more complicated now, because I'm going to have to go hire somebody new. I'm going to have to take on their responsibilities and stuff like that. So sometimes people just look at them like, I'm good. And here's the problem with that. A lot of times when people who you're working with are elevating, many times you're elevating too. And so I think sometimes leaders, when other people are elevating, you have to lose some stuff as well.
You mentioned something that kind of over time you can start to tell the signs that somebody might be resisting change or resisting loss, and why that might be. For those who maybe don't have the experience to know those signs, can you share some of what you look for and how you navigate them?
I think, first of all, where it starts, when they're really resisting change, I notice this, they begin to become very nitpicky with you and the organization and their leadership. And like with the organization leadership, and sometimes with you as their direct report. I think that's one time it's there. The other thing which you begin to see, I think sometimes, is procrastination in the work, where they're supposed to be doing something and they take forever to kind of do it. The other thing, depending on somebody's personality, they begin to become cynical. They begin to have like little comments here and there. And, you know, another thing which you begin to see, I think sometimes for me, a lot of times, is body language. You know, one thing that I notice and check out a lot is people's body language when moments happen. And I think when they're, you know, people coming in and there's just always like more of a, you know, the negative body language and things like that, when normally maybe they don't have that. So I try to look for, when I know there's change happening, are there behavioral changes that are going on? Do they start acting out of character, things that they normally don't do? And so when that's happening, a lot of times I can see that there ends up being resistance, that there's resistance actually going on internally.
What are ways that you resist change?
I think I resist change in, I can procrastinate in the name of trying to be thorough. But my natural disposition is like, I only need 10% of the information. But when I feel like there's a change that's happening, I'll prolong it. Well, you know, I don't know. What if I make it, you know, like a too early decision? I got to think through it more. When knowing that, like right now, there's, I think, some real internal changes, or really changes happening within the organization and things we're leading. I really feel like that's one of the things I've felt for the last few weeks, is that there's some things I have to let go in order to take hold. And so some of the things I have to let go in order to take hold, there's changes that have to happen. There are things I've got to start doing. There are things and one of the big ones for me is things I have to say no to. You know, I still have that thing where I say yes to a lot of things. that find interesting or whatever. But I believe that there is a very clear focus that needs to happen in this season. And so with that clear focus, what I am going to lose are opportunities because of this season. I have to focus on those things that are right in front of me. And so I think that's one of those things where I've been dragging my feet, or I'll say yes to something and it just stresses me out because I've got that and I've got these other things. And so I realize right now, and so what I'll do is procrastinate it. And then when I get very irritable because now I'm feeling pressure everywhere. And so, eventually we always say emotions go somewhere. And so sometimes, again, in my body language, sometimes the way I respond, I can become very irritable.
Something that we keep using interchangeably is we've been saying resist change, and then we've also been saying resist loss.
Yep.
And so I want to read a quote that we read, and part of what's framing why we're using that kind of language.
Yep.
It's from Leadership on the Line. It says, "People do not resist change per se. People resist loss. You appear dangerous to people when you question their values, beliefs, or habits of a lifetime. You place yourself on the line when you tell people what they need to hear rather than what they want to hear. Although you may see with clarity and passion a promising future of progress and gain, people will see with equal passion the losses you are asking them to sustain."
Yeah.
It's a really good quote. Every time I read it, I'm like, oh my gosh. How do you communicate better to those that you lead what it is that something will cost them while simultaneously giving them hope for the future without using that hope to water down what the cost is going to be?
I think it's always asking permission, because I think if people, a lot of times I think people want, very few people don't want to grow and lead, I think intent. But then when you start laying it out to them, hey, here's what that's probably going to mean, or you still want to do that. And if they give you permission to say, yes, I do want to do that. So I try to be very clear. I try to undersell something, than oversell it. Okay, man, so sometimes I can be worse than that, because sometimes I can undersell it so bad, right? Give no hope. But I think that's one thing that I try to undersell it. But also the most important part of this process is asking permission. Is this still what you want to do? And then when they say yes, you always can bring them back to that. Hey, well, remember what you said, and remember what I told you was going to happen. That's one thing that I've learned in leadership too. It's super important to explain to people if you've done it enough, what the process is going to look like. Because when it happens, you can remind them, hey, remember when I said this? So, you've heard me say this with different clients that we work with. I always tell them, when people start working with me to start changing, things get worse. For whatever reason, their life, things that have nothing to do with me helping them develop, starts going crazy. And I tell them this was going to happen, but when it happens, it's going to get better. But you're going to have to weather the storm. And so when the stuff starts happening with them, they're like, I go back and remember what I said. You know what I'm saying? It's going to get worse before it gets better. Because what that does, that gives them, and, it's kind of like having it's like being able to grab a hold of a life jacket, in the middle of the storm. Because I think sometimes leaders, when people are moving from one place to the next, that's incredibly scary, because there's no guarantees. There's no guarantee that that's going to work out. We hope it's going to work out, but there's no guarantee it's going to work out. And so when they're going through it, sometimes people just need that lifeline to say, hey, remember, you're fine. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, if, when you were trying to learn, teaching my kids how, to swim in the pool, and they get it, and they, the water starts going up or whatever, and they're like, nope, they start panicking, but, you'll grab them and say, hey, you're okay. You're fine. I'm right here, blah, blah, blah. I think sometimes leaders, we have to understand that people need that. We can't just say, well, they just, they got to figure it out on their own. No, our job is to lead them. And leading people means that sometimes you have to hold people's hands as you're guiding them through tough things. That's leadership. Leadership is not, let me just run so far in front of you to where you're just trying to catch up. Sometimes leading, it is that. Sometimes leading is me coming back, walking side by side with you as we walk through a tough part. Sometimes it's me walking a little bit, pulling you. Sometimes it's getting behind you to make sure you're not slowing down at your pace. So that's leadership. You're trying to lead people somewhere. I think that's where we always have to remind ourselves, we're trying to go somewhere. And so if we're going somewhere and we've been there, we're the ones who have to help lead people to that place and talk to them on the journey. You know what I mean? I was in Morocco one time, and with our close friends, Corey and Tasha, me and Wendy, and we're there, and there's a guy as we were in Marrakesh. And so older city, is like a hybrid of old city and then new city, right? And so this guy, you could tell, like he was like an elder, like in the city. Come to find out, this guy did tours with like Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, all these things. And so, man, when he was going, he was an incredible guide because he was like always, like when we would go through like the crowded parts of the market, right, that you're not used to, it's like kind of like in the movies where you see meat hanging down and stuff like that. And you go in the market, he would like literally, you're like, you're sick because it's different. He'd be explaining what's going on. Or man, there's been moments where like there's a lot more open. So he would go. When we went to I don't know if you ever seen, like it's the square we went to, and it's there when like you see it sometimes like the see the monkeys and things like that run up on people's arms and stuff like it's so crowded, but it'll freak you out because all of a sudden you're like it's so crowded, and then all of a sudden a person and they're trying to make money, whatever, they'll come up and you'll see this freaking monkey just rub your arm. You're like, what in the world just happened? But when we were in that part, he was super close to us and he was like pushing people away. Because he was just a good guy. He knew what we needed. And when it was open space, he would just, sometimes he'd be behind us. He would give us room to go just sit there and just admire what we were looking at. And what I learned from that he was a really good guide who knew what we needed as he was showing us around the city he loved. And I think that's the same thing we're supposed to do. We need to know and care for the needs of those we lead and help guide them as they're going through their process.
I love that. I think, well, what do you do because in that example, the gentleman guiding you was familiar.
Yeah.
What do you do when you yourself as the leader are not familiar?
Yeah.
And maybe you could use us as an example.
Yeah.
Like real time.
Well, I think that, so you mean for you? Like, what is it like?
Or even just within new rules, like where we're going and what that looks like now, even when we're going places that
we haven't been before.
That we haven't been before, but places you've dreamed of.
Yeah, I think one of the things you have to do is I think you as a leader do your absolute best to study people or situations that have, when real change has taken place, what were some principles that are there? Even though the circumstances look different, there's actually principles that are there. So like you mentioning, like reading Leadership on the Line. Some of the places where we're going, there's going to be some loss that's there. And so like, okay, how are we actually learning, like what do I, like how am I teaching people through that? So I think you study other people, other organizations, other individuals that's gone through there. I think the other thing, you're honest with people too. When you don't know, it's okay to say you don't know. Guys, I don't know what this is going to look like. I mean, you've had these conversations before. I'm like, well, I think this is where we're supposed to go. But you don't know. And I think people are okay with you if you're willing to say that. You know what I'm saying? Like, hey, I don't know. I think this is the right step. You know what I mean? But like, and a lot of times you'll hear me say stuff like, man, we're going to try this. This is a test. You know what I mean? Like, we're just, this is kind of, we're experimenting with something. If we don't know what's going to happen, because now everybody's like, okay, all right, it's an experiment. All right, we're going to try something just like an experiment. Sometimes experiments work, sometimes they don't. And so I think that's kind of, like what it is. And the other part of it too is just like, I think you just have to then commit. I think that's been one of my things. It's like, you don't fully see it. And I just think at some point you got to commit. Say, okay, like I'm just going to walk this way until something else changes. And so I think that's kind of the way you have to kind of go through it.
So when, as a person, you are well acquainted with navigating yourself and navigating other people through disappointment, when you're going somewhere that you haven't been before, you can understand that you need to count the cost and guide others through counting the cost. But what about the times where you're doing that, but you don't feel any hope that the cost is actually going to be worth it? Or that what you're saying is going to happen is actually going to happen? How do you still lead people through that when you yourself don't see the hope? Yeah,
I think that it's the same way. I think it's just one step at a time, and I think it's being realistic. I think what you have to do is be in the moment. We talk about that a lot. I think as in leadership, and just in life, you got to learn how to be present, because that's all that you have is in front of you. I think everything that we do in life, there's just no, people say there's no guarantees. There is no guarantees. I mean, I don't care what the principles look like, whatever. All of a sudden, you're like, man, we feel like we're going to go here. Think about this. We had all the principles and things of what we thought the world was going, of where we thought we were going, right? And then all of a sudden, COVID hit. No one was expecting that. So all the plans, all the principles, all the, man, we could project, I think it's going to go just like this. And literally a pandemic happens. Well, that threw a wrench in the anomaly into the system to where now, yeah, it's completely different. And so I think that that's why I say that. It's that every time you're doing something, you got to be in the moment because nothing's guaranteed. So a lot of times when I'm leading and I don't know where we're going to go, or I don't feel like I'm not fully confident, it's just, okay, what's in the moment? What's in my hands right now? What do we have to accomplish right now? Like some of the stuff that we're stepping out to try to do, we're learning on the fly of what we're trying to do to build something into an industry, using things like AI and stuff like that. That's out of our wheelhouse and whatever. But what we're doing is just taking one step at a time. You know what I mean? It's like today, some of the things we're trying to do for this product that we're launching. And I was like, man, trying to think of some different things. I'm like, well, let me call my friend Vince for whatever reason. And then Vince's like, oh, yes, this is what I'm doing now. This is how I can help you. And it was like one of those signs where like, okay, we're at least heading in the right path. But in that moment, like, I've been hitting some points this week where I'm like, how are we going to do this? What are we going to do? Is this really going to work? And so I think that you just have to stay present. That's one of the most important things you can do.
Mm-hmm. So essentially some of what we're talking about is levels of ownership and levels of buy-in to a mission.
Yep.
And sometimes there are, even within an organization, I feel like we experience this too. Like there are fans. There are people within the company who are like, I like when we do good, I don't like when we do bad. Or
Yep.
I like, especially within the church space, I like when y'all do good, I don't like when y'all do bad.
Yep.
But that is very different than having the ownership of being on the team.
Yep.
I'm willing to actively impact the game
Yep.
and be a part of the game and have the ownership that it takes to be a player.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay to have both existing within an organization? Is the goal to add all team players? Like
Yep.
what?
Yeah, I think that depending on how big the team is, I think the larger your team is, I think you can have some people who are, quote unquote, like they're like role players, bench players, if you're trying to think about a sports analogy, to where they're like, the one moment they're fine, next moment they're like, I don't like whatever. But as long as they do their job, you're fine with that. But now the smaller your organization is, no, you got to have some committed team play. I mean, everybody's got to be all in because you have limited resources, limited time, and when I say limited resources, it's like limited human capital. So like just, the amount of, kind of like space people have, the amount of like intellectual ability someone, a group has, the amount of time someone has, but also financially where if you're a small team, you're probably investing your money into this group. So you can't just have somebody who's like, just kind of on the side. If you're at Google, you can, you get 1,000 employees, you probably, there's probably a lot of people over there just like, yeah, I really don't care. I'm just kind of here, but when you're in this kind of the center and the core leadership, you got to have those. So I think just depending on the size of the organization that you have, because here's the reason why, because when you're leading, you got to really dive into the difference between, what they like to say, the adaptive challenges versus technical challenges. I think that when you have to do an adaptive challenge, which are things that, which are challenges that make you have to change your internal infrastructure. Well, I mean, these are challenges that are not there. The solutions are not within the organizations. The solutions are somewhere out there that you don't have. That sometimes takes behavioral changes. That takes intellectual changes, emotional changes, whatever it may be. You got to have leaders who are all in to do that. Leaders on the outskirts can help you with technical, and that's where a lot of us want to stay in technical changes, which are just changes that can happen within the organization. You already have the solutions within the organization. And so the answer to that, I think as you go, you got to have in the core level, you got to have people who are committed because they'll help you make adaptive. They'll reach and go after adaptive challenges.
How do you identify between the two and bridge the gap?
Are you more asking for like bridging the gap between a team player, that type of, or adaptive and technical?
Adaptive and technical.
Yeah. I think the adaptive, what you start to realize in an adaptive challenge, how you know it, is that you first start with yourself and start saying, okay, like, are there things that I have to change in order to solve this problem? So let's use basketball skill training. When we first started to do training, we were mobile. We didn't have a gym, and so we would go everywhere, and it was great. Well, then when we got a gym, that became an adaptive challenge because we had behaviors that were for being mobile. When we had an internal, man, we we actually got to take care of a gym. Oh, man, there's lights, there's AC, man, We had to change pricing structure. People who were a part of our academy had to get used to, they were used to the convenience. Now we're saying, no, we want you to come here. And so those are adaptive challenges because behaviors had to change. A technical challenge would be, going back to the same analogy, if you're in the gym and all of a sudden you're like, man, like, in the gym, the gym's getting dirty, right? Like it's always like, okay, well, that's a technical challenge. A technical challenge that you have every resource you need within to change that. And so that's kind of the difference. If you don't have the answer within the organization, that's usually an adaptive challenge. If you do have it, that's usually a technical one.
How do we grow in our ability to navigate adaptive challenges?
You have to start with yourself, because I think it's so easy for a leader and for people to actually start looking at, they see an adaptive and they're trying to get everyone else to change versus realizing, okay, where do I have to change? Remember, you can't export what you don't have, because when you actually start realizing, man, here's where you start to understand how to solve it, because you start to look at, okay, where are my roadblocks? Because if you can figure out what your roadblocks are, then you realize a lot of times those are going to be the roadblocks for other people who you're trying to help. And so you'll begin to have wisdom, not just thought, but you actually have wisdom because you're like, you've processed like, oh, for me to actually accept this, I've got to think this way. For me to actually accept it, okay, what's my roadblocks? What's my hindrance there? Because once you're able to do that, then it allows you to have more clarity, more wisdom. It also allows you, I think, once you're able to pull those things down, you're able to see clear. Because a lot of times what happens, adaptive challenges are high emotions. And so if you don't process that, you can't see clear answers. And so what you end up doing is you'll try to make technical decisions on a big adaptive challenge because technical, you can control it and you're trying to alleviate it. So a lot of times we'll use the wrong tools, have the wrong kind of approach to something because we're just trying to alleviate the emotional weight that this situation is actually carrying for us.
Mm-hmm. How do you need to change some of the adaptive challenges that you're facing right now?
I think what I was saying earlier is that genuinely having to say no to things that are not heading in this direction right now. And that's really hard because there are going to be things I actually enjoy. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh no. And honestly, and probably have a skill set to do some of it. But it's like, it's becoming even more like fine tooth, okay, more like laser focused with some of the stuff. So that's one of the biggest challenges for me, is being able to do that, because those are great opportunities. And some of these opportunities, some of them are financially, up front, are great. But I know what we're trying to do long term will be even better. You know what I'm saying? It'll be more of an impactful in the overall vision, but also financially as well. So that's one of the big places for me. I think the second adaptive challenge or kind of internal change I'm having to make is really being in a place to upgrade myself, and having an understanding how to raise funding. That's an adaptive challenge. I don't like asking people for anything. And so now really understanding, how do you put together, if we decide to have investors in certain things, or, if I start to have partners and some real estate stuff, okay, how do we put that together? How do you go ask? How do you pitch that? What do you need to do? I think that's a challenge. So that's an upgrade in the leadership instead of just kind of staying the same way. So those are all challenges that are actually there.
And culture creators, you said to effectively guide others, we must be the change that we see in them. And you've mentioned that here a few times.
Yep.
How do you effectively communicate to your teams and even larger organizations what it is that's going on inside of you and how that impacts the way that things are playing out? Yeah,
I think that what I'll have people do and what I'll do is to kind of look at the environment. So if, somebody I work with right now, he kind of has a lot of anxiety around certain things. And the thing is, he doesn't realize he has a lot of anxiety. So when you go into their meetings, it's just sometimes it's chaos, right? And what I'll try, and it's because they're making big changes. So what I have to help him do is take a step back and say, hey, do you see this? Remember, you're going from this to this. So here's all the dynamics that's happening right now. And so I think it's also understanding the person. Some people are very analytical, so you have to help them see through that lens. Somebody like me is intuition, is feel. So if somebody's helping me, it's the feel part of it. You know what I'm saying? So like today I was talking with, again, someone on our team, but he's also, again, a mentor, my Dr. Zoda. And I was talking about how right now I was feeling about a situation. And what he was able to help me do is like, man, take those feelings. Yep, you're right. I can understand where you feel this way, but here's where we're headed. Here's why this is important. Here's where you have to push through that. And he kind of challenged me on something very specific. And so I think a lot of times you got to help people see, like help them look through the lens, through even their own eyes, you know what I mean, of how they actually view the world. Like, there's parts of you where you have great intuition. And so there's parts of you where I'm like, man, the feeling that you're having help you like, okay, yep, that feeling is real, but okay. But in that feeling, what else is going on? What are you seeing? How's this cloudy? Do you not see this part? This is why this is present. So help you see that your intuition is not off, but see why it's pushing there. Because I think if you can help people do that, then they can begin to say, okay, again, it's that whole thing. I'm going to be okay. Because when you start feeling something different, you're like, what in the world's happening? And it's like, this is part of the process. And then you start helping them figure it out. Then I think you're doing a good job of actually guiding and leading them, and it'll help them see it better.
I think one time you did something incredible. Well, more than once, but in this specific instance, you were working with a CEO, and you were she's very stoic.
Yep.
And so in times of crisis, when she's presenting what is coming next and what's coming with the desire of showing hope, she can almost come off as like flat, or as if she's kind of missed the impact. And that's not, who she is at all.
Yep.
It's just kind of how she comes off because of some of the ways that she was like raised.
Yep.
And you did a beautiful job at walking her through how to communicate to like 100+ people, hundreds of people that don't know her personally, how to communicate within a moment of crisis, like what is going on with her internally in a way that is appropriate for them to understand in that context.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And I think I can recall that moment, what I had to do is she's very analytical in what she does. So I had to help her, like, for me, it's a natural feel, right? So here's the difference, though. Now I'll kind of come back to her. But there's certain moments, though, where when you're communicating, it's not about the feel. You got to be very clear and technical, right? Because you're like, okay, we're about to do this, this, and this, okay? See, those moments, I have to like be the same way I had to coach her in the moment where with everybody's feelings and anxiety and how and her really share how this was impacting her. Somebody would have to do that with me. Hey, right here's 3 or 4 things you have to say this clear, because I'll just go off a feel, and sometimes you don't need that. So for her, what I was able to do, but it was helping her not try to be me or anybody else, but to actually communicate in who she is, because that was what I was trying to get her to understand. Because knowing her so well, it's like I already know where her heart's at. It's just in those moments she was so trained up, once of her upbringing, but also she was so trained up in this corporate world, where it's like, especially as a female as well, and also a female of color, that, man, it was like you couldn't show emotion, because if you did, that's seen as, oh, you're weak. You know what I'm saying? Or, oh, that's just one, women have emotions. And so a lot of times you're the only woman that's in the room. So you start shutting down part of who you are. So the thing was like having empathy for her, knowing like, man, I know who she is, but she's been trained to shut that down because she is a Black woman. And that's not okay. And so that's why I was able to say, no, like, I know you aren't share that. They'll be okay. But what I was able to do too was give her a little bit of hope to say, listen, because her thing, if I share this and what if it comes off this way and what are they going to think? You're like, no, they need to see that you're human. And so she actually did it. And that was one of the biggest things people talk about. Oh man, that was how she handled this was really good. And so that's the other thing too, is that when you're able to help lead people and then they see a result from it, that's super important, because when they see the result, they're like, oh, they trust you a little bit more. You know what I mean? It's like when you throw your kids up in the air and you catch them, they trust you. But if all of a sudden, let's imagine most of the time you throw your kids up in the air and you're like, oh, they hit the ground. You're like, all right, dog, I don't want you throwing them. I'm not going to let you even touch me anymore. And so I think you got to make sure you're getting wins that way, because it actually helps people through. Well, hey guys, I hope today was helpful. I want to challenge you simply with this. Right now, I've mentioned this book, Leadership on the Line. I'm going to encourage you to get it. It's one of the best leadership books that I've read, especially I believe in where the world's headed, is that we're heading into a world to where things are going to be a little bit more difficult. Things are changing, even as I mentioned in this pod, talking about, artificial intelligence. I mean, things are rapidly going to change. And in that change, leaders have to make adaptive changes, and so I want to encourage you, go get the book. It's an amazing thing. He goes way more in depth to technical and adaptive challenges as well, and he also talks about the real costs of real leadership. But I want to challenge you right now. What's something in your area? Maybe go right now, write down what's one technical challenge that you have. That's something you have the ability to solve right now. And what's an adaptive challenge you're dealing with? And see how you're in an adaptive challenge. How are you feeling? What are the internal structures you need to change in order to be able to see that challenge actually and get a win there? Until next time, keep writing new rules.